Hello and welcome to another video. So in this video, we're going to be continuing on with the JavaScript challenge, and we're going to be doing problem call function with custom text. We only have a few more to go in the JavaScript challenge. So in this problem, you want to enhance all functions to have the call polyfill method, and the method accepts an object as its first parameter and any number of additional args, and the object becomes a this context for this function. So let's take a look at this for this first example. So we have a function that says return this a plus b, and we're calling it on this object here and the 7. And so essentially this needs to refer to this object. So it will get the 5 and then it will add the 7 and give you 12. Let's look at another one. So we have another function and we want the cost of this dot item and price tax rate. So item would be the burger here. So it should say the cost of the burger is price dot tax rate times tax rate. So it should be like 11, I think. Yeah, 11. So essentially what we need to do is we need to add to every function's prototype. What we need to do is we need to actually add the object, and then we need to call the function on the object with the object being this. So I actually prepared an example for you guys just to show you like what we're going to be doing and how it's going to be working. So here we have two different objects that we make. So we have a create person with a Bob with a get name, and it returns Bob's name. And then we have create person Kathy with also a get name, and it will return Kathy's name. So I created a person 1, a person 2, and then we use this line here. And so I'm going to explain this line and what actually happens. So person2.getName is actually Kathy's name, right? Because we made a person 2. And what I said is let's take person2.getName and let's bind person 1. So what does getName do? Well, it just returns this dot name. But when you bind person 1, then when you call getName, it uses person 1 as the this parameter. Like what bind does is it uses a context for a this parameter. So when I save that, then and I console log person2.getName, and if I run this, you can see it prints out Bob. So because it's saying for person2.getName, for this, don't use the person you're in, actually use it for the person you're bound to, and you're bound to Bob. And so if I actually console log like this, if I actually do this, I think this will work too. If I do this, bind person 1, and now I call it on nothing. I don't think I need a. Let's try this. So you could see here, now what I did is I did the same thing, except I didn't save this get name, right? I just said, let's bind Bob to Kathy, right? Because person2.getName is Kathy's name, but let's bind the this to be Bob. And so when it takes return this.name, it's using Bob, and then I invoked it because the bind doesn't actually call the function, it just binds it. But the bind doesn't actually save, like it doesn't actually override the function, because the difference between here and here is here we actually overwrote the function, overrid, but here we're actually just binding it and calling it one time. So if we do this, if we don't have this bind anymore, if we just have person2.getName and we call that, then let's see what happens. So it prints Kathy. So the bind doesn't save it, it just uses it for that instance. But you can save it as well. So it will return a function with the context being bound as the this for the function. So if you want to save it, you can save it, but otherwise you want to call it once. So this is going to be like the intuition of how we're going to do this problem one way, right? We can just bind. So here in this problem, we can do the same thing. We can just bind to that person. So what we can actually do is we can just say return. And what are we actually going to use? What are we actually binding here? So we're going to say, like, what are we binding, right? We probably want to be binding this because this is the function. So we want to say this dot bind, I think. Yeah, this dot bind. And then what are we trying to bind? We're trying to bind the context to this function. So what this will do is this will bind this context to the function that we're calling. So like in this case, when we do increment call polyfill, we're binding this context to increment, but just for one use because we're not saving it, right? We're not saying like it equals. We're just saying let's just bind it one time. And now remember, this returns a function, so now we actually have to call the function. So now we have to call the function on the arguments. And so let's try that. And you can see that works. So once again, what we're doing is we're saying this is the actual function that we're calling, because what we need to do in this problem is we need to change the prototype. This can be any function, right? This can be increment, this can be decrement, this can be whatever function you want. This needs to work for any function that you pass this into. So you can't just say like return increment.bind or something, because it might be a decrement, it might be a subtract, it might be whatever. And so this is how you do it. So once again, we're going to go over this. So this is the function that we're going to be calling, and it can be any function because we're in the prototype of that function. So when you're in a prototype and you say this, that's going to refer to this function. Then we're going to bind the context to that function, because when we want to call the function, if there's the word this in that function, this is now going to refer to that context. And finally, we're giving it arguments to call it on, because remember, this just returns a function. It doesn't invoke it. So you need to actually invoke it by giving it arguments. Okay, now there's one other way to do this, and I think I prefer it to this way, because bind, I feel like bind is more useful when we're going to want to store this somehow. Like my first example, you know, when you actually want to store, when you want to actually change the function, and then you want the this to refer to something else. But if you're just going to use it once, there's another way to do it, and I think this is like better. And I think if you're not going to store it, you might as well just do this. And so this is the same thing essentially, except now we're just applying it one time. So if we're not saving the bound function, then there's kind of no point in calling bind. I think apply works better. And so what apply does is kind of similar. So you're applying up this function to this context, not to this context, sorry. This context will be like the this keyword in the function essentially, and then we're gonna have these arguments. And so this is pretty much the same thing as bind, only with this, we're just applying it straight away, right? With bind, we are overriding the function, and then we're getting a new function. With this, we're just applying directly. So this is like, if you want to apply a function to another context, this is what you'd use. I think this is like the better way of doing it. And then if you want to save a function, like in my previous example, where you want to have person to get name, if you want to save a function, or you want to just make another function, right? Like custom func or whatever, right? You can say like custom func or something, equals like this. But if you're just going to apply it one time, apply, I think is definitely the way to go. There's one other way to do it with like objects, but I think these are the two most common ways, and these are the easiest two ways. So I just recommend sticking with these. So if we do this apply, this also works. And so let's go over this one more time. So you want to use apply when you only want to apply a function to some context. Not apply a function to some context, sorry. You want to apply a function where the context is going to be, when you have this in the function, the context is going to be what the this refers to, right? So if you have like this.count++, the this will refer to the context, and then the arguments is actually the arguments you're passing. And then you want to use bind when you want to actually save a new function where the this in the function is going to refer to some new context. All right, so that's going to be it for this problem. Hopefully you liked it. And if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.